Hello everybody, it's Steve Bates of the BIA. We'll be starting this webinar in 2 minutes time. 2 minutes time until we start this webinar. So hello everybody, it's Steve Bates of the BIA with our Brexit webinar for September. As you can see, 182 days till Brexit, or 804 days to the end of transition. So I hope we can give you a useful update. What I'm planning on covering today, and I don't have Laura Collister with me, she's on holiday this time round, are the negotiation updates, what's happened at the European Council and what happens next in terms of the negotiations between the UK and the EU. There's been quite a lot of activity in the UK, and you'll bear with me, I hope, as I take you through lots of technical notices on what might happen in the event of a no deal, the medicine supply contingency planning programme, what's going on with regard to Parliament and scrutiny of the UK position, including the Migration Advisory, the MAC Advisory Committee report, and some sense of the political scene in the UK at the moment with the party conferences. I'll touch on EU updates in terms of clinical trials notice to stakeholders, and then give you an update on what we're doing. But before I start, I'd like to remind everybody it's European Biotech Week, and we're full participants of European Biotech Week. We'll continue to be participants whatever happens next year, and it's great to see activity going on in Brussels. We've got the balloons up in the BIA office, and I know there's activities around and about Europe on explaining to everyone the benefits that biotech can bring. So if you look at the Twitter feed, it's really good. Second thing I'd also, to put you in a good mood on an afternoon here in the UK, is our third biotech financing update for the year, which covers the period June to August, as published this morning. And the good news from UK biotech scene is that we've raised more money in 3 quarters than we did this year in 2018 than we did in the whole of 2017. So it's fantastic to see great companies growing and getting the finance they need to move forward. If you're interested in that, you can have a look at it on our website. But now back to the joy that is Brexit. Last time we took you through these items, and as you know, the heritage of these is for all to see on YouTube at the link here. So if you want to catch up on where we were in August, that's what we went through, and I won't look too much to do that this month. Negotiations. How are the negotiations going? Well, recently we've had the Salzburg Informal European Council at the end of last week. You can see a picture of Prime Minister May looking in one direction, and lots of men in suits walking in another direction in this picture. I think the headline there is fairly straightforward. There wasn't a breakthrough. There was no big a big development in the things, and in fact, perhaps it went backwards as both sides stuck to existing positions and then justified it afterwards. The UK stance presented just before and during Salzburg was surprisingly tough and uncompromising, Donald Tusk said, but he hoped for a compromise. Good for all is still possible. French President Macron chose to call the leaders of those who sold Brexit to Britain liars, and then Theresa May came out and said she won't break up the country, needs serious engagement on resolving the issues. But not very much happened in terms of moving things forward, and I think the pound dropping is an indication of the market's reaction as to whether this meant that there was more likely of being a deal or no deal. I think probably the chances of no deal went up. Donald Tusk is keen to make sure that people are focused within the EU 27, although we're still warning of the possibility of no deal, and we need to act responsibly to avoid catastrophe. So what happens next? Well, negotiations are continuing behind the scenes. They're not necessarily very public. I don't know where they've got to, but we expect to see them going on for the rest of this month into next month. European Council on 18th to 19th of October may shed some more light, perhaps a special meeting at the start of November and a deal or mid-November if you think things are going well. The purpose for that is that obviously any deal would need to then get ratified through both the European and UK parliaments, and they certainly need something before the end of the year. So no puffs of white smoke if you are used to papal elections, and I think we stay close to this. You'll see this in the papers or in the media at the same time as we do. We'll stay across it, but nothing immediate in the next week or two. Could the deal, if there was a deal done, get through the UK Parliament? Well, I think that is a test. We don't know what the deal would be or how it would format, and I'll talk a little bit more about the febrile UK political scene in a minute. But it's quite tricky for MPs because they'll only be able to choose between passing the deal and not passing it, and if they're Remainers, it's unlikely that will be the deal that's put before Parliament. So how will they vote? Will they vote to knock down a deal they don't like, or will they go with a deal that isn't perfect but prevents no deal? So I think that's the judgment that they'll be making. If there was a deal, what would it look like? We would expect to see a top-level heads of agreement on the future relationship. The deal would have the details of withdrawal, would be a legal text on the withdrawal of the UK from the EU, but the future relationship would probably simply be a heads of agreement. How much detail that would get could vary. I've seen, I think, sensible analysis that suggests it may be very detailed in certain areas and not very detailed in other areas. I think there's a chance that our sector might be in the detailed area because there's been quite a lot of work in it, and there is formal and detailed proposals from the UK government that the European side have had a chance to chew on, but that's speculation. We're going to keep going with our asks, which if you followed this at all, you'll know over many years we've been continuing close cooperation on regulation, free ability and ease of movement for trade, access to talent being free and easy, and continued collaboration on R&D will be our big things, and we will seek the best possible interpretation of regulation during any implementation period if we get there. Plug in on this slide for our Bioscience Forum on the 18th of October in London, but if you're in Hanover, BioDeutschland also have an event on the 17th of October where you will be talking Brexit. So either of those might make a good point in your diary if you're interested in this. That will be just ahead of the European Council, and as I said, I've already talked about potentially a European Council being put in early November, penciled in, or a decision at the December Council, which I really think would be the last knockings. As you go into 2019, the UK government are expecting the new Customs Declaration Service to go live in January, European Council towards the end of March, and then 29th of March, the exit day deadline at 2300 hours Greenwich Mean Time. we'll see how much of this timetable survives contact with the negotiations, but they're the dates that are in our diary. If I can turn from the negotiation, which I can summarise as not going very well, to what's happened in the UK. And from my perspective, I'm hoping I can take you through the planning that the government have put out in the UK for NoDeal, how we should operate in terms of the technical notices, their asks around medicines supply contingency. I'll then take you through some of the thinking that I think is developing in the government on an important area of immigration or migration through the Migration Advisory Committee. We've had developments in parliamentary scrutiny, and then I'll look at some of the alternatives that are being mooted at the moment for how Brexit could happen, both from Labour Party from their conference last week and some of the Brexiteer alternatives to Chequers from the IAEA and the Institute for Economic Affairs and Boris Johnson. So the government have decided to step up their no-deal planning, and over the past few weeks have released in 3 handy batches a series of technical notices which give guidance for businesses and citizens as to how they could expect to operate in the unlikely event of there being a no deal. The way that we've handled this is we communicated with members most of the sector detail which came out in the first batch, and we sent a mailing in August, but there are some other documents that have come out in the last batch. So I'm going to stay chronologically with this. So if this repeats old ground in the first couple, for those who've been through it, bear with me. I'll get to the third set, but they are all now published on the UK government website. So we'll remember that it seems like a long time ago in August, UK will continue on batch testing, an important issue for our members. UK will continue to accept batch testing carried out in a set of countries listed out by the MHRA, which will include the EU. So essentially unilateral recognition of important parts of regulation are important, and there's lots of detail on how medical devices and clinical trials would be regulated if there's no deal, with lots of papers on those published in August. This is what we provided a briefing on last month. There's also a document on trading with the EU if there's no deal. All of these sit in this UK government website. It's fairly easy to find, and one on Horizon 2020. So these are all still first technical notices. And then there are a few others which were worth going into if they are important to your business in GMOs, organs and tissues, nuclear research, civil nuclear regulation, Euratom, things like that, if they're of relevance to you. So worth a look if they matter to your business. There's then quite a lot on VAT, classifying your goods, state aid, trade remedies, banking, insurance and other things, workplace rights, with a fair degree of continuity. The new ones that have come out since we last briefed on this have been around business regulations, importing, exporting, and a few others. The most important one, I think, for questions I've had from members is that the intellectual property material came out last week. Exhaustion of intellectual property rights if there's no Brexit deal, how patents, trademarks and designs will work if there's no deal. And there's also some stuff around how road haulage, exporting animals, importing plants would work, which I know some people care about. But the key one, I think, is the IP one and patents. REACH, the regulating chemicals, was also in this batch, and that's important if you're in certain manufacturing steps. So the key ones I think that are out this week are IP, patents and REACH. There's also a set around driving and aviation security and various other bits. So I hope I've pulled the right things out. In the intellectual property rights technical notice, there is some wording around parallel trade, which basically says a parallel import can still come into the UK, but there were no change for things coming in, but there may be changes for things to go from the UK to the EEA, and you need to check with the EU rights holder on it. I know that's an issue people have been concerned about. Alongside the technical notices on the gov.uk website, there's also a useful document from the Intellectual Property Office, and I found this document more useful in a sense than some of the technical guides last time out when the government put out documents in the first tranche, they also accompanied it with a communication from the MHRA, which is very useful for medicines regulation. This time around, alongside the documents that came from the government, from the Department of Exiting the EU, there's also an update and a brief from the Intellectual Property Office. It's at this website, and it's called IP and Brexit, the Facts. I find that a useful document if you want more detail, and it does touch on things like supplementary protection certificates, as I've put in here. This is the wording on that. Also touches on the Unitary Patent Court, the UPC, rights of representation, and other things that I know colleagues here in the legal world have been asking for detail on. So it's there. That's the best document. I would start there if you care about this stuff. So I'm turning away now from the formal documentation that's come from the government on what to do, how we should prepare if there's a no deal. Remember, we don't know whether there's going to be a deal or no deal yet. To the other ask that the government's had of the sector, which is a request from pharmaceutical companies that supply medicines for NHS patients from or via the European Union or EEA to ensure they have a minimum of 6 weeks additional supply in the UK by 29th of March next year. To recap on this, companies were contacted by the Department of Health. Responses were requested by the 10th of September. And there were also particular requests for those that are short the shelf life that might want to think about air freighting, and essentially people were asked to fill in a survey, and I know that's where we're at. So I'd like to thank members and the non-members who may be on this who've engaged with the survey. Our position is we've stressed to government, and they recognise that endeavouring to do this in less than 200 days is a massive challenge for the industry and the MHRA, and we encourage all participants to be as prepared as possible for a scenario that industry really doesn't want to see, and we shouldn't be under any illusions that doing it would be easy or smooth. I suppose where we're at now, the deadline for the information from companies back to the government has passed. The governments are following up from the department those who haven't heard from. And a similar program for device companies to that which was organised for therapeutics companies will be launched soon. We're continuing to work with the Department of Health and Social Care on the program, especially around non-returners or emerging themes that have come. And if you think you should be in this but you've not been engaged yet, this is the email, medicines contingency planning at dh.gsi.gov.uk. I think watch this space. I think we'll see more on this in the coming weeks. Turning to another part of the forest. So we're moving away now from no deal to migration policy. The UK government is going to set out a new migration policy, and we may see some of this at the Conservative conference next week. Many moons ago, they asked a group called the Migration Advisory Committee to do a report on EEA migration in the UK, and this came out a couple of weeks ago. It's important because it may give a hint or be the basis on which a future migration policy, visas, ability to move talent around will be based on. And I think it was quite helpful from our perspective. It was quite considered. If you look at it here, they've got the message that we told them, that recruiting highly skilled migrants help them fill skill gaps and enable us to remain globally competitive, that that lack of qualified people was the most important barrier to innovation, that it's important to have people being able to move in to found and to innovate in startups, and that was important for STEM projects at PhD level. So I think it was a useful report from our perspective, and I think we managed to land some of our core asks from members into it. They have made some findings and recommendations. This isn't government policy, but I think it may inform government policy. So you can see that makes the case for clear benefits to existing relevance of highly skilled migrants, higher skilled immigrants, increase innovation. That they don't see a compelling reason to offer a different set of rules to EEA and non-EEA citizens unless the UK wishes to use migrations in negotiations. So there may be, they call for the tier 2 cap to be removed as well. So lots of useful stuff. I think it gives a flavour of where this may go, and I think it's just one to mark your card that this is likely to be coming soon. A little bit on scrutiny of the Brexit process from parliamentarians. There's been a report from the Lords EU Committee on Brexit and Customs. They looked at the costs of business, and it looked like there's going to be $18 billion of cost to business if we have that would have challenges in the supply chain, that the facilitated customs arrangement is complex, relies on untested systems. So scrutiny suggests that some of these things ain't going to work very simply in the event of a no deal. There was also a Brexit Select Committee publication recently that looked at the UK's negotiated position, and they didn't think that the government's proposals on the common rule book for goods of facilitated customs arrangements can remain as currently proposed, given the European Union's fundamental objections. So, unsurprisingly, this was sort of borne out at Salzburg, as I've already talked about, but criticism of Chequers is around in the Chequers proposals from the Prime Minister are around in Parliament already. Here's a new one. The Health Select Committee are doing a new inquiry. This is not stuff that they've reported on, but they are seeking written submissions with evidence sessions in October on the impact of NoDeal Brexit on health and social care system, including patients, suppliers, providers, NHS and others. So they are seeking evidence. We plan to put in evidence to this, and this is one that will pop out. I imagine they will look at the contingency supply program, they'll look at the no deal technical notices, they'll look at things. So we have the opportunity here to input, and we will be inputting into this with the ABPI on members' behalf. It's party conference season in the UK at the moment, and the internal politics of the Labour Party are important, given that they are the main opposition party with many MPs, and this is a very close parliament where, in a sense, every vote counts on knife-edge votes. The big takeaway from last week was that they agreed a new Brexit policy composite, arguing that if Labour cannot get a general election, Labour must support all options remaining on the table, including campaigning for a public vote. And then the shadow Brexit secretary, a guy called Keir Starmer, said in his speech from the podium, nobody is ruling out Remain as an option. And I've put in little letters here, something which is reported in The Guardian. The point being here that there's an emotional response to this, I think, amongst many. The response in the hall to that was immediate. First, the instant volley of applause, but then from deeper in the hall, and somehow also from somewhere deeper in the gut of the party conference, came the cheering, prolonged and surging, and then the standing ovation. I think this goes to perhaps where the Labour membership are, 90% of which support remaining in the European Union, although the Corbyn leadership is, I think, trying to triangulate between the Labour vote, particularly in the north of England, that voted for Brexit, and cities like London, which are vastly remaining in context. Why does this matter? This matters because the Labour Party are now basically pledged, if they can't support the deal, which I think is unlikely, if they get one that they will support, they are then going to vote for a general election. If they don't get a general election, then they may vote for a second referendum. So I think, although you have to go through parliamentary gymnastics to get there, this has increased the chances of there being a second referendum in some scenarios. The other people who are having a sort of a move in politics at the moment are the Conservative Brexiteers who don't like the government, those who resigned from the government. They've come up with a new document called Plan A Plus, written by Sankaseum from the Institute of Economic Affairs. It's basically a new paper which calls for a UK-EU free trade plus deal, calls for a breakaway from European regulations, tearing up the common rule book, and arguing that regulatory independence is not just an ideological position, but what makes the gains of Brexit possible. So seeking to break with regulatory close cooperation, which is our position, but we should just be aware that this is out there, and this may well be something that gets discussed at Conservative conference. They also, however, it's interesting, if you look at the IAEA, they did another paper called Medical Provisions Post-Brexit, and there's a bit more pragmatism from the IAEA position. They argue that the UK government could be a rule taker, despite them not liking the position of the UK being a rule taker, by arguing in this document the government should underline its willingness to act unilaterally on tariffs and regulatory approval. So they're sort of supportive of the notion that you should recognise European Medicines Agency pieces, although it's not what they put up in lights in their document. So although they argue for regulatory reform or regulatory freedom, they actually are pragmatic on our sector when you dig in through the documentation. You may have seen this on your newsstands this morning. Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary, has written a 2-page article for the Daily Telegraph, which is not dissimilar to the Plan A Plus stuff, but in perhaps easier language, in which he calls for the Conservatives to chuck checkers, scrap the Irish backstop, rewrite the withdrawal deal, negotiate a Super Canada deal, invest in border controls, prepare for no deal, and start trade negotiations in April. Sounds all very simple and straightforward. I think this is all posturing ahead of the Conservative conference, but you can see that there are moves afoot to undermine the government negotiating position and come up with something else. On no deal, what he's saying is quite interesting if you look at it. He argues that people on the whole don't like to be panicked by their government. What we want are practical ways of sorting out what are, after all, basically banal questions of bureaucratic procedure. It says we used to trade smoothly with France and Germany before we joined the EU. We can easily do so now. So I'm not sure that Boris is someone who spends the day looking at licensing requirements for medicines on both sides of the channel, or the need for batch testing and release or anything like that. He seems to think that this is all straightforward and easy to do. Not one I tend to agree with. Just giving you the acronyms here ahead of next week. So the European Research Group is the single issue research group for Conservative Party led by Jacob Reed-Moss, which I like are the Brexiteering lot. And the Tory Reform Group, the TRG, are the independent group of members and friends of Conservative Party to promote the values of one nation conservatism. As the Conservative Party finds its position and works out how it's going to vote in whatever position on the deal, we'll be following this, and it's quite important that we understand it. I'm not sure you need to bother with it unless you're particularly interested in the colours of blue within the Conservative Party. But there might be a leadership challenge. George Freeman, the former Life Science Minister at the bottom here, said he said to Theresa May that there should be a new set the deal for the new generation and hand the torch of responsibility on to them. I think the country would cheer. Perhaps George is thinking about this. Lots of others are certainly considering it. So febrile UK politics. Back, if I may, to perhaps the more practical and EU position. The latest clinical trial publication has been put up from the European Commission. At this point, they basically have issued guidance because it's not EMA to do this one, and I think they basically ask that people get ready for the UK being a third country, consistent and expected with other European indications on regulatory issues. Just want to be aware, and I know that many in the sector are involved in clinical trials, so just thought you should be aware of that. Not unexpected, not desperately helpful, but in line with expectation. The European Medicines Agency have also started to put up a tracker on their relocation to Amsterdam and their main milestones. So we're having a look at this one. It's quite good. I think the main thing that we're seeing from the European Medicines Agency, and I know there was a meeting with industry this week, is the considerable strain the agency is under, and the reducing to a core focus is obviously what they are doing through this period, following a very prescriptive perspective. We've told you that the UK is going to be a third country. Be ready for it and get going. We expect you to do it. That continues, and I think the agency itself is under a big challenge, not only with the move, but particularly with staffing. I think it is more of a challenge to move staff than perhaps had been initially expected. and we can see by the fact that agency leaders are saying that they are no longer going to participate in some of the more forward-thinking things or international collaborations, whilst they try and get the basics, keep the basics going and keeping the lights on. That's sort of where they're at, and not much flexibility, if any at all, for companies. So I know that that's the experience of BIA members. They're sort of head down and charging for next quarter. I'll take a breath and tell you what we're doing, and I hope that it's helpful. So I hope we've communicated with members around the request on the medicine supply contingency planning program, and that you're up to speed on that. So please fill in the form if you've not done so. I think most people have, and thank you to those who have. We've tried to provide updates and response to the NoDeal technical notices. I'm looking forward to hearing from people about their reactions to the third tranche. I think companies' response to this are that you are noting it, you're aware of it, but you are holding it in the balance as to whether you think this is the scenario that you need to take action for. Some people are well prepared for a no-deal Brexit. Other people have triggered contingency plans. Other people, I think, are in a wait-and-see position. But I think at least what you have now are some more detail that you can chew on. I'm not sure it's to the dot and comma on everything, but there is quite a lot out there now in terms of what no deal will look like from a UK perspective. There's certainly clarity from the Medicines Agency about what no deal look like from their perspective, and their perspective from the Chequers documentation around what a potential deal would look like from the UK perspective. So the big challenge is whether you think there's going to be a deal or not, and what time frame you think there's going to be a deal in. And I'm afraid I think that is the big call, the big judgment. My sense is that people had put it at 50-50 before. The odds are going up, I think, but until a deal is done or not done, I think it's very hard to call that one. We've had ongoing meetings with around trade policy, thinking about the future for this. With this, it's quite a lot of complexity. If the UK does end up in a no-deal position, there are some trade deals with third countries that are reliant on the UK deal with the EU. And we're looking into the implications of those deals and how they'll go on. And thank you to members who are engaged in that. The EU relationship group with ministers is the new meeting of UK ministers with industry to look at these issues. There was a useful meeting on 13th of September focused on contingency supply and the technical notices. The European Industry Association Coalition met last week. And as did the Brexit Lead Network, coordinating and engaging. Thank you for those who've come along or engaged in those meetings. What's coming up? We're at all the party conferences. Pamela and Laura will be at a Conservative conference next week. As Parliament returns, we'll brief individual MPs who are interested in life sciences around our perspective on this. We'll consult, we'll put into consultations as they arrive. The Health Select Committee I've mentioned. We're expecting to see an MHRA, DHSC formal consultation on the regulations, the statutory instruments they will need to lay in the event of no deal. That with the legal text for the medicines regulation. We're promised it in September. We've not seen it yet. I imagine it will come very soon, and there will be a short consultation on that. We will share that when we see it and engage through our regulatory advisory group, the community, on that one. We continue to work on trade. We've got our Bioscience Forum, which will have a session on this, and a mirror session to the BioDeutschland event on the 17th on Brexit, on the 17th and 18th of October. We're meeting our ministers again in November, and we have another Brexit Lead Network on the 5th of November. Fireworks night in the UK, Guy Fawkes plot being remembered. I will make sure that we are far more calm on that. And as an aside, I don't know if you know that one of the leader of the gunpowder plot was, of course, Guy Fawkes, but the man who was caught with the barrels of gunpowder underneath the Houses of Parliament was in fact his manservant, who went by the name of Bates. So that's why I'm always conscious of knowing that. He was the only Protestant amongst the Catholics, and he went to the stake for it. So a little bit of a diversion there. And you won't find me under the Parliament on the 5th of November, no. And we're continuing to talk about this to the media. We're doing our trade advisory forum. If you're interested in these areas, please email Laura. We've put a draft trade policy paper out, and if you're engaged in this, we'd be really interested in hearing from you. I'm not sure it's going to change the price of fish in the next 3 months, but we've got to get this right going forward, whatever type of Brexit happens. And remember, our position remains forever the same. We want a formal relationship after exit with the European Medicines Agency. We want continued supply of medicine, safe and rapid, effective public safety, patient safety and public health systems, no red tape, patients are able to access stuff, and the maintenance and growth of the life sciences industry in the UK. We want people to be able to move around for good jobs, maintaining brain circulation, which enables innovation to happen fast, and we'd like to engage with Horizon 2020 and its successor, and the European Investment Fund and the European Investment Bank. So a song that we've been singing for a couple of years, and it remains the same whilst all of this other stuff goes on. So it's a crucial time. No progress on the timetable from the UK-EU. Some clarity on no deal has emerged, but not what we want, and UK politics is still febrile. I hope that that's given you a summary of where we're at. Apologies, it's been a bit longer today because there's lots of that technical notices stuff. I'm very happy to take questions. Question, we understand the UK farmer will not be able to use the EU portal to submit filings to the EMA. What will be the alternative? Well, I suppose the position, if you take the view that the UK will be a third country, to take the EMA's logical position and conclude it, you will submit your data to the EU from your European regulatory base. It's a good question, actually. I'm trying to think because I wasn't at the meeting at the European Medicines Agency earlier in the week where I think this came up, and my colleague Christian is also not with me today. Let me come back to you on that one. I'm thinking, is the EU portal up and running? I don't think it is. Therefore, I think you could continue to submit in the normal way. If you're an American company, you'd submit in the normal way. I think you would, if the UK was outside the EU, you'd continue to submit in the normal way. I think you make a good point about the technicalities of the logistics of submission, both to the EMA and the MHRA in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And I know that there's some more work being done on both of those. I can't answer it in a detail. Am I planning to send a communication out after the 18th, 19th, the EU summit? Depends on what happens. If it makes sense, and we think, certainly if there's a deal or a breakthrough, we will look to do that. I realise that those days are in the teeth of the Bioscience Forum and our AGM, so it's tricky for us in terms of logistics to do it on that day, but our endeavour is always to update members in a timely manner on key bits of Brexit as it moves. If it moves, then we'll do it as soon as we can. Unless there's anything else, I will encourage you to join me at some future BIA events. Next week, we're at Harwell, somewhere between Didcot and Oxford, for a campus networking lunch and tours around the synchrotron there. The Bioscience Forum is our core August event. Do please look at the website and sign up. Great autumn reception and some great panels. We've got a really good panel on Brexit at that day in the afternoon. If you're interested in manufacturing, Bioprocess Conference is fantastic. 300 people there. I know that many people are looking forward to it in Edinburgh this year. A really good event. And the gala dinner tickets are selling fast for the last Thursday in January, where over 700 of our community come together to celebrate the success of the sector at a formal do. So I hope to see you at one of those events, if not before. If you're not a member of the BIA, but you've found this useful, please do consider joining. Jane would love to hear from you, and there's access to lots more member benefit through membership. If you're tuning in for this again, at the moment we're planning on doing one of these on Friday the 26th of October. I think we'll take a judgment as to how things develop in mid-October as to whether we need to bring that forward, but my sense is that probably we'll stick with this one and look to do one on the 26th of October. With that, thank you, many thanks, have a good weekend, and hope you found that helpful. Many thanks.